The airport was unusually crowded that morning, the kind of chaos that made even the most patient traveler sigh in frustration. Children cried. The PA system buzzed with constant announcements, and coffee cups trembled in the hands of hurried passengers. Among the tide of polished shoes and expensive luggage stood a woman, barefoot, trembling, her oversized coat barely concealing her swollen belly. Her name was Amina. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was matted, her eyes red but defiant, and in her arms she clutched a small worn-out bag as though it carried her entire life, which in many ways it did. People glanced at her, then quickly looked away. No one wanted to make eye contact with the kind of desperation she carried. When she approached the boarding gate for Flight 307 to Johannesburg, the gate agent's smile faltered. "Ma'am," the agent began carefully, "this flight is fully booked. You must have the wrong ticket." Amina's lips trembled as she handed over a crumpled piece of paper. "I bought it last night. Please, it's the only way I can get home." Her accent was soft, her voice the sound of someone used to being ignored. The agent inspected the printout, frowned, and then shook her head. "This ticket, it's unpaid. Your payment was declined. I'm sorry." Amina froze. "But I used the money I had left." "I checked," it said confirmed. Passengers behind her started murmuring. Irritated at the delay, a businessman in a navy suit rolled his eyes. "Can we move this along? Some of us have real places to be." Amina turned toward him, humiliated. Her cheeks burned as the agent called security. "Sir, please escort this woman outside." "No, please," Amina whispered, tears welling up. "I'm pregnant. I need to go home." Two security guards gently but firmly took her by the arms. As she was led away, she cried out, "Please, my baby. I just need help, that's all." But no one moved. Phones were raised. A few people recorded her. A mother covered her child's eyes. And within minutes, the image of a homeless pregnant woman being escorted out of an airport vanished into the crowd. Another forgotten tragedy. Outside, rain began to fall. Amina sat on a cold bench, soaked, clutching her belly as if her hands could protect the tiny life inside. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Pain, fear, exhaustion. But she bit down on her lip and stared at the horizon. She had survived worse. Inside the plane, passengers began settling in. The businessman from earlier, his name was Daniel, adjusted his cufflinks, annoyed that the delay had made them late for takeoff. The flight attendant smiled mechanically, unaware of the ripple of fate that was about to unfold. As the engines roared to life, Daniel suddenly frowned. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "Sir, urgent. Our system flagged an error in the humanitarian account. You transferred $10,000 to an unknown name. Amina B. Last night. Should we reverse it?" Daniel blinked. Amina, the same name as that woman. He vaguely remembered something. The night before, half asleep and frustrated, he'd authorized a batch of transactions from his company's charitable foundation. His assistant had mentioned a pending case. Some homeless refugee woman who had been denied aid because her ID was incomplete. Daniel had clicked Approve All, not realizing her name was among them. His chest tightened. That money had been meant to reach her account that morning. But maybe the delay, the system lag, had caused her ticket payment to fail. He pressed the call button. "Excuse me," he said urgently to the flight attendant. "Is it possible to delay takeoff? There's been a mistake. A woman who was just removed from this flight. She shouldn't have been." The attendant gave him a polite but firm smile. "Sir, we're already taxiing. Please remain seated." Daniel's pulse quickened. "You don't understand. That woman, she's pregnant and homeless. If she bought her ticket last night, she might have used funds from my company's account. I need to—" "Sir, please," she interrupted, now clearly uneasy. "It's too late." The plane rolled forward. But before it could lift off, a loud commotion erupted from the back. A passenger shouted, "Something's wrong outside." Daniel turned to the window. Through the misty glass, they could see flashing lights on the tarmac. Security vehicles were rushing toward the terminal. For a split second, he saw her, Amina, collapse on the wet ground, clutching her stomach. "God!" he muttered, standing up despite the seatbelt sign. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing an unexpected delay due to a medical emergency. Please remain calm." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Open the door," he demanded. "She needs help." Within minutes, paramedics were on the scene. Amina's cries echoed faintly across the tarmac as thunder rolled overhead. One of the flight attendants who had earlier ignored her now ran beside the stretcher, face pale with guilt. Daniel rushed down the steps, ignoring protocol. The security team tried to stop him, but he shoved past. "I'm the reason she's here," he shouted. "She used my company's funds for that ticket. Let me help her." When he reached the ambulance, Amina's eyes fluttered open. Recognition flashed between them. The businessman for the line, the man who had looked away. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They kicked me out." Daniel swallowed hard, rain streaking down his face. "I know. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have been." The paramedics lifted her into the ambulance. Her breathing was shallow. "Baby," she murmured. "Please don't let them take my baby." Daniel climbed in beside her without asking permission. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Inside, he gripped her hand. "You can be okay. Amina, I promise." Her eyes rolled back, and the siren wailed into the storm. Hours later, the hospital's fluorescent lights hummed quietly. Daniel sat outside the emergency room, drenched and silent. His phone rang endlessly, board members, journalists, his assistant, but he ignored them all. A doctor finally emerged. "She's stable," he said softly. "It was close, but both mother and child are alive." Daniel exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. When he stepped inside, Amina was pale but breathing steadily. The baby, a tiny, fragile girl, lay in a transparent cradle beside her. "You came," Amina whispered weakly. "I had to," Daniel replied. "You changed everything for me." Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. "No one ever says that to me." He hesitated, then said, "You will never be homeless again. I'll make sure of it. I owe you that much." But Amina smiled faintly. "Don't owe me anything. Just help others like me." Daniel looked at her, and for the first time in years, something broke open inside him. Something he hadn't felt since his wife's death years ago. Compassion. The next morning, headlines blazed across social media. Homeless pregnant woman denied boarding. Saved by same passenger who ignored her. Businessman funds shelter for expectant mothers after near tragedy. The video of Amina being kicked off the plane had gone viral. Millions were outraged. The airline faced public fury, and donations poured in for Amina and her baby. When reporters later asked Daniel why he'd intervened, he simply said, "Because silence is the most dangerous comfort we allow ourselves." A week later, Amina sat by her newborn side in a clean hospital room, sunlight spilling through the window. Daniel entered quietly, carrying a small blanket embroidered with her baby's name. "Hope." Amina looked at him and smiled. "Hope," she repeated softly. "That's what she is." But just as peace began to settle in, the doctor walked in with a strange look on his face. "Miss Amina," he said slowly, "we ran some tests from your blood sample. There's something you need to know." Amina frowned, clutching her child closer. "What do you mean?" The doctor hesitated, then glanced at Daniel. "You both may want to sit down for this." Amina's heart thudded in her chest as she looked from the doctor to Daniel, confusion flickering across her exhausted face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor's eyes softened. "There's something unusual about your test results. We found a rare genetic marker, one that matches an old patient record in our system. It's from a man who donated a blood sample here years ago for a medical study." Daniel frowned. "What does that have to do with her?" The doctor took a deep breath. "Mr. Daniels, that man was you." Silence fell over the room. Amina blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "What are you saying?" The doctor looked between them. "Based on the DNA match, it's almost impossible, but the data suggests a biological connection between you two. You might be related." Daniel's face went pale. "Related? That's not possible." Amina's breath caught. Her mind spun, trying to piece together fragments of a past she had long buried. Faces, voices, moments that never made sense. "I don't understand," she whispered. The doctor nodded. "We'll need to run further tests to confirm. But if I'm right, Mr. Daniels, Amina could be your half-sister." The words struck like thunder. Daniels staggered back, gripping the edge of the hospital bed. "No, that can't be." Amina shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't even know who my father was," she said softly. "My mother never told me. She died when I was 10. I grew up in shelters, moving from one country to another. How could this be?" Daniel stared at her, memories surfacing like ghosts. His own father, a businessman who had traveled across Africa years ago on long, unexplained trips. There had been whispers of a secret, something his mother once hinted at before she passed. He'd ignored it, buried it under years of ambition and success. He turned toward the window, his reflection pale against the city lights. "My father used to spend months in Cape Town, Nairobi. He had business everywhere. He never talked about it. But my mother, she once told me she wasn't the only woman he loved." Amina's hands trembled as she touched the blanket wrapped around her baby. "You think?" Daniel nodded slowly, his voice hollow. "It's possible." Neither of them spoke for a long time. The beeping of the hospital monitor filled the silence. Rain tapped softly against the window pane. Finally, Amina broke the stillness. "So all this time," she whispered, "the man who ignored me at that airport could have been my brother." Daniel closed his eyes, shame flooding him. "If that's true, I've failed you in more ways than I can count." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't know. None of us did." The doctor quietly excused himself, leaving them alone. Daniel sat beside her bed, his voice low. "Amina, I don't know what to say. I spent years building an empire, chasing money, power, while my own blood was out there suffering. If I hadn't been on that flight, if I hadn't seen you—" She looked down at her daughter, smiling faintly through her tears. "Maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe life had to break us both before it could bring us here." Daniel watched her for a long moment. "If the test confirmed this, you're not alone anymore. You'll never be again." Amina nodded, her eyes glistening. "And if it doesn't?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll still keep that promise." A nurse entered, adjusting the floor. The soft hum of the machines filled the air again. Amina leaned back, her eyelids fluttering as fatigue pulled at her. "You should go rest," she murmured. "I will," Daniel said softly, standing. But he didn't move. He stood there for a moment longer, watching her breathe, watching the tiny rise and fall of her newborn's chest. Something deep inside him had shifted. Outside the room, reporters were already gathering. News of the mystery benefactor had spread quickly. Cameras flashed whenever Daniel stepped into the hallway. He ignored them all, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't answer. Later that night, unable to sleep, he drove to his father's old estate, a mansion now half abandoned, full of echoes. The portraits on the walls stared down at him, judgment in every painted eye. He walked into his father's study, dust swirling in the dim light. He opened the drawer of the old oak desk and began searching through files, letters, anything that might explain the connection. And then he found it. An envelope, yellow with age, sealed but unaddressed. He tore it open. Inside was a photograph. His father, much younger, standing beside a woman with warm brown eyes and a little girl holding his hand. The woman's smile was the same as Amina's. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, were the words, "For Daniel, someday you'll understand." His hands shook. He sank into the chair, the truth hitting him like a tidal wave. Amina wasn't just another story of tragedy he stumbled upon. She was the missing piece of his family his father had hidden out of shame. He stayed there until morning, the letter trembling in his grasp, tears he hadn't shed in years breaking free. By sunrise, he returned to the hospital, the photo in his pocket. When he entered Amina's room, she was awake, feeding her baby. She looked up at him, sensing something heavy in his eyes. "You found something," she said quietly. Daniel nodded and handed her the photograph. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over. The moment she saw her mother's face, she gasped. "That's her," she whispered. "That's my mother." Daniel's voice broke. "And that's my father." Amina pressed a hand over her mouth, tears spilling freely. "All these years, I thought I had no one." He reached out, taking her hand gently. "You do now. You always did. You just didn't know." She looked at him for a long time, her expression a storm of sorrow and relief. "He knew about me, didn't he?" Daniel nodded slowly. He must have, but he never said a word. Maybe he thought he was protecting his family, or maybe he just didn't have the courage to face what he'd done. Amina's voice cracked. "He left us to suffer. My mother worked until she collapsed. I begged on the streets. If she had known there was someone out there who cared." Daniel squeezed her hand. "I know, and I can't undo that pain, but I can make sure it never happens again." She looked at him through her tears. "You sound just like her when you say that." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what family does. They find themselves in each other." The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. Amina gently rocked her, whispering something in her native tongue. Daniel watched quietly, a warmth blooming in his chest he hadn't felt since childhood. But before he could speak again, his phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Daniels?" A man's voice said, low and cautious. "This is Officer Nkosi, Cape Town Police Department. We've been trying to reach you." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What's this about?" "It's regarding your father," the officer said. "There have been new findings related to one of his old projects. Something that may concern your family." Daniel's eyes darkened. "What kind of findings?" The officer paused. "You'd better see for yourself, sir. It involves a foundation he established before he passed, one that's been quietly operating under another name. It's connected to several missing persons reports, including one tied to Amina's mother." Daniel froze, every muscle in his body tensing. "What?" Amina looked up at him, alarmed by his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, clutching her baby closer. He stared at her, words barely forming. "They just said your mother's disappearance wasn't an accident." The line crackled, the officer's voice grim. "Sir, we believe she was silenced." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears as the officer's voice faded into static. The sterile white hospital walls seemed closing on him. Amina's face drained of color. She clutched her baby tighter, the tiny child sensing her mother's fear and beginning to whimper. "What do you mean, silenced?" Daniel asked, his tone sharp, trembling between rage and disbelief. "Your father's old foundation," Officer Nkosi replied, "wasn't what it appeared to be. On paper, it was a humanitarian fund, helping women across Africa. But in reality, it laundered money through medical trials, trafficking identities, and using desperate refugees as test subjects. One of those names was Amina's mother. She disappeared shortly after contacting the authorities." Daniel's hand went cold around the phone. "My father was involved in this?" The officer sighed heavily. "We can't confirm how much he knew, but his signature is on documents authorizing those experiments. We think she tried to expose it and paid the price." Amina's eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered. "She was sick. They said she died in a clinic fire." Daniel's voice cracked. "Amina, that fire was no accident." For a long, terrible moment, the room was silent except for the baby's soft cries. Amina stared blankly at the wall, memories flashing, her mother coughing in dim shelters, clutching secret papers, warning her to trust no one. "She told me." Amina whispered, shaking. "She said men in suits came asking questions. I thought she was just scared. I didn't know." Daniel knelt beside her, voice raw. "I swear to you, Amina, I'll find out the truth. I'll tear down every wall that man built if I have to." But she turned to him, tears streaking her face. "He was your father." He met her gaze with fire in his eyes. "And he took everything from yours." The baby's cries grew louder, filling the room with a fragile kind of life that contrasted sharply with the darkness of their discovery. Daniel took a deep breath, forcing his voice steady. "We'll fix this," he said softly. "We'll make her name known again." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Investigators unearthed files buried decades deep, ledgers coded under false names, offshore accounts. Every revelation hit Daniel like a hammer, each one chipping away at the image of the man he had once idolized. The media caught on quickly. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire's father linked to secret medical scandal. Refugee woman's death reopened after 20 years. Crowds gathered outside Daniel's company headquarters, chanting for justice. The airline that had once thrown Amina out tried to offer her money for silence, but she refused. She had learned what her voice was worth. Daniel stepped down from his position at the company, turning all of his attention to rebuilding what his father had destroyed. Together, he and Amina launched a new foundation, *** the Hope Initiative ***, named after her daughter. The mission was simple but powerful: to protect and empower women who had been forgotten by the world. Amina, once invisible, now stood before cameras and global audiences, her voice steady and fierce. "I was thrown off a plane," she said in one speech, "but I learned to fly without wings." Her story captured hearts across continents. From Nairobi to New York, her face became a symbol of resilience. Women reached out to her with stories of their own, survivors who had been silenced for too long. Yet behind every public appearance, the private storm raged. Daniel struggled to reconcile the sins of his father with the man he wanted to be. There were nights he couldn't sleep, staring at that photograph, the one of his father, Amina's mother, and the little girl between them. One night, weeks later, Daniel stood on the balcony of his apartment overlooking the city lights. Amina joined him, wearing a plain white shawl. Her daughter was asleep in her arms. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. "I'm not hungry," Daniel murmured, eyes distant. "I keep thinking about him, how he could look a child in the eyes and still do what he did." Amina looked down at the baby in her arms. He couldn't see past his own power. "But you did. You stopped the cycle." He shook his head slowly. "Maybe I'm just trying to make peace with my guilt." Amina turned to him, her voice firm. "You didn't choose your father's sins. You chose to make them right." The wind carried her words like a quiet anthem. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a glimmer of peace. A week later, the investigation took one final turn. Officer Nkosi called with the results of the recovered documents. Among the wreckage of the clinic fire, they had found an old letter, sealed, never sent. It was addressed to Daniel's father. When they opened it, the words were scrawled in faded ink. ***, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll take care of our daughter. Her name is Amina. ***. Daniel stared at the letter for a long time, the paper trembling in his hands. He realized that even in death, her mother had believed in a promise never kept. Until now. He brought the letter to Amina the next morning. She read it silently, her tears falling onto the page. When she looked up, her expression was calm, almost radiant. Then she knew. Amina whispered, "She knew one day I'd be found." Daniel smiled faintly. "And you were, not just by me, but by the world." Months passed, and the Hope Initiative flourished. Shelters were built, clinics reopened under new management, and countless women found safety and education through their programs. Amina became its beating heart, the face of survival and forgiveness. Daniel often stood behind her at events, content to let her shine. But one evening, during a global summit in Johannesburg, she called him to the stage. "This man," she said, her voice strong and clear, "was once a stranger who looked away. But when he chose to see me, truly see me, our lives changed forever. He is proof that redemption doesn't erase the past, but it can build a better future." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Daniel's eyes glistened as he hugged her, the crowd chanting hope, the name that had become both a mission and a miracle. Later that night, when the applause had faded and the city quieted, Daniel sat alone under the stars. Amina joined him again, her baby now toddling beside her, giggling softly. "You've given her a world better than the one we were born into," Daniel said, watching the child reach for the sky. Amina smiled. "We both did." He looked at her thoughtfully. Do you ever think about what might have happened if that day on the plane had gone differently? She chuckled softly, shaking her head. If I hadn't been thrown off that plane, you wouldn't have found me. I would have vanished like my mother. Another forgotten story. Life has strange ways of saving us, even when it hurts. Daniel nodded slowly. Maybe pain is how fate gets our attention. A gentle silence followed. Then Amina turned toward him, her eyes full of quiet strength. You know, she said, for years I thought my story was about suffering, but now I realize it's about becoming. Daniel smiled faintly. And what have you become? She looked toward the horizon, where dawn was breaking in soft gold. Free, she said simply. At that moment, the first light of morning bathed them both, warm and forgiving. The child reached for the sun, laughing, a sound that seemed to wash away years of grief. In the months that followed, documentaries, books, and interviews poured in, but none could capture what truly mattered. The bond between two souls who had lost everything and yet found each other in the wreckage of truth. Amina's baby, Hope, grew up surrounded by love and strength, her mother teaching her that even in the darkest moments, there is light waiting to be born. Daniel became her godfather, devoted to ensuring she would never know the hunger or fear that had defined their past. One afternoon, when Hope was old enough to walk to the Foundation's new headquarters, she stopped before a mural painted on the wall. It showed a woman standing barefoot in the rain, looking up at the sky with her hands over her belly. "Who's that, Mama?" she asked. Amina smiled, her eyes misty. "That was me, before I learned to believe again." "And who made you believe?" the child asked innocently. Amina looked across the room, where Daniel stood speaking to a group of volunteers. He glanced back at her with a knowing smile. She whispered, "Life did, and a stranger who forgot to stay a stranger." As the years rolled on, Amina's story became a legend, a reminder that destiny doesn't always arrive dressed in kindness. Sometimes it appears as heartbreak, humiliation, and loss, only to reveal its purpose when all hope seems gone. The world would remember her not as a homeless woman kicked off a plane, but as the woman who rose from the ground, carrying not just her child, but the truth of her bloodline and the power to change countless lives. And every year, on the anniversary of that stormy day at the airport, Daniel and Amina returned there, standing quietly near the same gate. Passengers still hurried by, flight numbers echoed overhead, and somewhere a child laughed. Amina would smile, hold her daughter's hand, and whisper, "This is where everything began." Daniel would look at her and reply softly, "No, Amina, this is where everything was rewritten." The world moved around them, unaware that two souls once broken beyond repair had rebuilt the meaning of family, forgiveness, and faith in humanity, all because of one cruel moment that became the beginning of something magnificent.